restarting now that I've gotten a fresh cup of tea, and I imagine other people have also done similar things. Appreciate everyone's patience with this really tough stuff that we're doing. So folks had questions about essentially like, what does all of this do to the education fund as a whole? And Julia's back in the chair to tell us about that. That's it. That's my whole intro, I think. I can add more.
For the record, I'm Julia Richter with the Joint Fiscal Office. You'd like me to share my screen?
Yes, please. And I asked you to basically build out a new version of the Outlook. You look at the Outlook every week these days, with this mechanism in it. So, so we can really see how things shape out. I really want to remind folks, though, that we sort of have an assumption built into some of this, that districts might want to make new decisions based on this new information once it passes. And if that happens, the yield would change further, right? So if some districts decide to spend less as a result of having a new transition mechanism, we would see that in an updated Outlook that's not here in this Outlook.
Yes, thank you. So this is really reflecting a lot of what we've seen before and some new changes here. So to just sort of recenter where we are, what we're looking at, this is the Education Fund Outlook for FY24 as reflecting BAA, and then which is still being deliberated in the Senate. And then sort of three different iterations of FY25. Columns D and E should look very familiar to folks because these were previously presented in this committee. So column D is reflecting the December 1st Outlook that corresponded with the commissioner's letter when there was the estimated uniform bill increase of 18.5% based on, you know, preliminary projections of ed spending of 12%. Then last week, I presented to this committee modeling that included that 5% Act 127 cap and the updated school budget data from the Agency of Education. And we saw that all districts had hit the cap. And so our average bill increase for homestead and income was 20.6% and non-homestead was 22.7%. For today, I was asked to model to include the new transition that we just spoke about before the break that is estimated to cost approximately $30 million to the education fund. There's also a few other updates that have been included here to reflect the current picture of the education fund as we see it. So in addition to the new transition, there is now an updated increase in the prior year reversions. So that's sort of considered new additional revenue coming into the education fund that was not booked in the original AOE's original BAA request. It's with new updated data. And then there's new estimates for a few of the FY25 categorical aid numbers from AOE that you see reflected here in some small differences.
And so we can't really isolate all of the changes that are happening in the ed fund right now from each other. And so the way I'm thinking of this is like, we are moving through time. The column D was like what we understood to be true on December 1st, November 30th for the record. And the next one was essentially what we knew to be true when we received all of that new budget information last week. And we're still sort of thinking about the cap mechanism. And what F is sort of what we know to be true. And I think is sort of our best option for transition mechanisms. So but there's like lots of other things happening under the surface, like reversions and updated revenue forecasts and fines and who knows what else.
So yeah, so this is really reflecting sort of the latest picture of the education fund and the transition mechanism talked about today.
The only concern I'm going to flag, I don't know how to say this, but anyway, is yes, for the first year that we're talking about what to do. But we haven't really discussed whether we should go 5 years out or not. This time that we're discussing this bill.
No, we haven't. We talked about 5 years in the original mechanism, and I stuck with 5 years because I feel like there's so much instability and question and confusion in the field right now that it felt like that was one thing we could stick with. But this is right now, we're just talking about this year.
Yes.
And so can you bring our attention to like the change in the yield numbers and the change in the percentage, the change in average tax rates and those things?
Yes, so taking in those factors into play and resolving the yield model, so there's a uniform average bill increase across all three classes. We see the uniform non-homestead property tax rate of $1.46. The property yield at 9,775. And the income yield at 10,191. With this rate and these yields, we see an average uniform bill increase of 19.99%.
Julie, are you using, for line 26, you're using the numbers that you've gotten recently, and it's the same number as, no, it's a different number than last week. So that's the latest sort of Warren budget number that you have?
So yes, so line 26 is showing a difference from last week. The education payment, so the warned budgets and the latest budget data hasn't been updated from AOE. This is reflecting a few smaller changes to categorical aid estimates. So that's a slight decrease in transportation, small schools, flexible pathways, and universal school meals.
Okay, thank you.
I think Representative Matos had.
I had the same question as Carl.
So, Julia, this, the categorical aid discount that we're gonna, where does that show up here? Is it in line 1A and 2? Or am I is there an actual line up there that says $30 million or?
Thank you. No,
Okay.
there's not a line that I've added into the outlook
Okay.
to reflect the change. It's included in the background of all of the modeling. So I sort of artificially did the modeling in order to create a total cost.
Okay,
But that, because that cost is like baked into the calculation of the yields, if the committee wanted, I could add another summary line that said that.
so
And
basically just like how we do current use then.
exactly.
Okay, all right, okay, thank you.
It's great parallel, thank you. I remember another hand somewhere.
I think I'm good.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'm just gonna make a comment because, so the question's gonna come up, who is paying for the $30 million? Okay, and the answer is all taxpayers in the state, property taxpayers in the state of Vermont, regardless of which district they live in. There will be a lot of confusion about that subject, but that's who pays for it.
Right, absent new resident.
Yes, you may.
All right, so that's what I was thinking. So it's regardless of where you live, regardless. And so who is that when you say property taxpayers, are you talking about property taxpayers who don't have income sensitivity? Or property taxpayers with or without income?
With everybody.
Everybody.
Everybody that gets a property tax bill, whether it's based on.
Homestead, non-homestead, income, not income. And does that, now, is that somehow, how is it distributed? Like, would somebody who is income sensitive pay a greater or lesser share?
They're
How
going-
did it?
Depends on what district they're in, but they're all gonna pay more than they would have otherwise.
That's.
And that, I mean,
what
that might
need
be
to
like
know.
a 16th of a cent.
Yeah,
It's just everyone.
everybody's gonna pay it.
Well, I would like to see how that plays out in each district. And to know that it's something like a 16th of a cent, that is something that people could just go, oh, well, you know,
Well, so that's true for, sorry, Scott.
$30 million is about 3 pennies.
3 pennies.
We're all gonna pay about 3 pennies more regardless of where we live. To
If we pass this and we have a linear relationship again,
Yeah.
that would be 3
Yes.
pennies.
That's just like universal meals.
The same
3
thing,
pennies.
that's right.
Except universal meals is actually, it turns out, much less
Yes,
expensive. than we
21,
thought.
22,000.
Big win.
Like what?
Representative Andrews.
So, but the modeling we have here today does not imagine what savings may come from this measure. Is that accurate?
Correct. And that's a really, like, say it again. I'm serious.
Am I correct, Ms. Richter, to say that this modeling does not imagine what savings may happen if we were to pass this measure?
That is correct.
Thank you.
For the
It's like
record.
a Perry Mason.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, we have a committee joining us, and so when we engage in crosstalk, it's really hard for them to hear us, as well as the perhaps hundreds of other people who are watching this on, I don't. Other questions about the outlook from the Ways and Means folk? Does anyone in the Education Committee have any questions, thoughts about the outlook? I know you all don't spend quite as much time with this glorious document as we do.
I'm not seeing any questions, thanks.
Okay, great.
The 39 people.
42.
So everybody's taxes would go up, as Scott just said, doesn't matter if you're homestead or non-homestead or a renter. He didn't say renter, but I'm throwing in
Yeah.
renter, that would include renters, everybody. Taxes go up a little bit, but it looks to me like they're not going up quite as much as they did on the old sheet. So,
We have columns, right?
yeah. Yeah. So, so in that way, we are saving the taxpayers some money over a proposal. This proposal is cheaper than the previous proposal.
You mean the previous proposal, current law?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm wondering about, ability really to offset, school costs. So when the voter goes into the booth, checks yes on the school budget, he approves a certain amount of money in his district to be spent. Are we paying for that figure?
So we always pay for that figure. But we pay for that figure in law when we pass the yield, which is not,
Okay.
so that's still a couple months out, right? And I think we're gonna have sort of 2 steps on finding our way to the yield. That would be, so if inside my imagination, and I want to be clear, this is just my imagination, we would pass some version of the legislative language that Kirby shared with us, as well as additional language that allow districts to cancel and or rewarn their budget votes in case they want to make changes. We would pass that. Then we would begin work on the yield bill, which would be based on both what we know about education spending that just came in, but also if districts are rewarding, we would get updated budget information that might bring down that total. And then we would do other things like looking at income adjustments and stuff in order to set the yield. That would be sort of our second step after maybe passing this legislative language. And then a third step would be looking at FY26 and beyond. Yeah.
I'll just make one point, and this just goes to what Carolyn was saying, is that yes, we would be, in this proposal would be talking about adding 3 cents on there because of the 30 million, but we would not have that additional spending that the cap brought up. I think that's really important to remember. So that additional, some of that additional spending is going to be rewarned and go away, and then those 3 cents gets at those districts that are losing tax capacity and helps them to make the transition over the next 5 years. I just wanted to say that out loud.
I think we've said this enough, but I think it probably warrants saying again. I don't think we're intending to imply that schools have like padded their budgets. And like, I think we all really recognize the huge pressures that schools are under right now with, 16% increase in healthcare costs, ESSER funds disappearing, school construction needs inflate, like the list goes on around real pressures around our schools. And we recognize and appreciate all the good work that school boards are doing to navigate challenging circumstances. And $250 million in increase in spending over previous years is just beyond what property taxpayers can support. And, hopefully this is one piece of encouraging some behavior change, which will be really tough decisions, at the individual school level, while we also try to have longer term conversations. But, we're just trying to help balance supporting our kids in our schools and, what property taxpayers can support in this moment. And that's really hard.
Representative.
Thank you. So we saw people read the law, see that there's a cap, act in a way that's totally legal to fix what their budgets would be based on the fact that that cap existed. So next step, I want to say, when we put in Act 127, we took out the excess spending threshold, which I think was something that would prevent school districts from spending. If they spent too much, then it would kind of rein them in. So when we passed Act 127, we took out the excess spending threshold. So now will people see that there is no excess spending threshold and make decisions based on the fact that there's no excess spending threshold that would push up spending to more than it would be if we had an excess spending threshold?
So I think one of the reasons we took out the excess spending threshold is we actually couldn't compare year to year because of all the other changes we're making. And so if we were going to put the excess spending threshold back in, I don't think it would be appropriate to do until FY26 because of all the other changes. We wouldn't be able to make the comparison that the excess spending threshold was built on. But we could certainly continue to pick that up once we're done with the outlook. Other thoughts on the outlook? Okay, thank you, Julia. So tomorrow, I'm hoping that we can look at we can go back to the legislative language that we just looked at and look at further legislative language that's about budget warnings and stuff like that. The Gov Ops Committee will also take a look at just that little section that's their purview, not all of the tax rate stuff, just the warnings and such. But what I'd like to do next is someone had really good questions about what it will be like essentially for districts to learn about these changes. And so I would love for Nicole to tell us about sort of what you're thinking about how to communicate all this to the field. And I don't know if Sorcia's posted any of your material.
Yeah, can I just say that there's a couple of Excel documents that I just cannot convert to PDFs. So I'm gonna email it to House Ed and you guys, and we will get PDFs posted on the website.
That sounds great.
After testimony.
Thank you.
Just for the record, I actually have to leave because my wife's sick and I have to pick up her son at daycare. And then additionally, for the record, I have to be late tomorrow because it's a late daycare drop off, just for the record. I'll be on YouTube.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Thanks for being such a good parent.
Absolutely.
Okay.
first.
Okay.
Thanks for listening on YouTube.
Nicole Lee, for the record, I'm just joining the Zoom meeting.
Where the quiet is much appreciated. Thank you, Chris. And for the record, I'm sorry I gave you a hard time about being 5 minutes late.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I'm just gonna be a parent first.
Yay. See, if we had more fathers like that, we'd have fewer weedy students.
I think that's a great big kettle of fish you just brought up there. And I'm gonna pretend you never
Maybe you
said
had
it.
one others that didn't want to use their own.
Okay. Nicole Lee is now the co-host, and so we're gonna.
It's emailed.
Can't find
It's
Nicole on
emailed
there.
to them.
This is a moment for me to shout out to my husband, who allows me to stay later because he picks up the kids. Takes a village to do this work.
My email's being very.
Is it clogged with?
I think Nicole, I guess I would say Nicole is going to share the documents on the screen. And can everyone hear me? I really encourage us to have Nicole guide us through the documents rather than have us try to navigate spreadsheets on our own.
On our website.
No, I emailed it to you.
Oh, you know, just, okay, got it.
Okay, so, what I have done is a couple of ways to represent what we've been discussing. So this first one that I want to show is every district in the state. And it is the share of 24 long-term weighted ADM under current law. It's the share of 25 under Act 127 final long-term weighted ADM. And then in column I, right here, this is the percent change that we've been talking about today. So it is increases or decreases related to your 24 to 25 district experience. So this is the first one. And it does give pupil information as well. I will say the field that I deal with typically talks about equalized pupils when we think about fiscal year 24. And I'm going to try not to go down this complicated web, but this number in column D represents 24 for fiscal year 24 information with no hold harmless and no equalization ratio applied. So it's taking that 2-year average ADM, adding the weights for last year and getting a value. And so that's going to be a different number than people are used to seeing for their districts. But it is, again, going back to what is the apple we're trying to compare this year's apple to? That is the number that we're currently using in the analysis. The second number that we're using is this year's frozen or final long-term weighted ADM using the 25 collection. And now that I've explained, I just want to pause and take any questions that anyone has.
We don't have any.
Okay.
Don't pause too long.
So what column I starts to do is show what the next workbook is going to walk into. But effectively, as we've been talking, if you have for this first district on the screen, a 13% decrease in statewide share, that would be equivalent to a 13-cent tax discount in fiscal year
And
25.
so column I is the data that backs up our little scatter chart S curve.
Now we can find.
And so that's just giving the statewide perspective. I'm now going to share the next document, hopefully. And so this one takes it a step further. And what we've already talked about is here in A through I. And what that then does is in K through O, it looks at what the tax rate discounts would be. This graphic is only the districts that would be eligible. So, it would be, again, for this first district, 13 cents in the first year. It would be, to be entirely transparent, 10.4 cents in the second year. Although when we get into parts of a cent, that will be feeding the background of the calculation should the policy decision be to round out to the fourth place. But I have shown it just as a whole cent.
And rounded out to the fourth place is how property tax bills are now. Yes.
We've provided a little bit of information here just to help those using this information have the out year information if that is what the decision is. So it would be 80% of fiscal year 25 and 26, 60% of fiscal year 25 and 27, that sort of thing. It does discuss over here some of the more weedy pieces of, as I had said, no hold harmless, no equalization ratio applied. And then I want to just pause here. I do have a third document, but I want to just give time if there are questions.
Cool. In column FY 24 current long-term ADM, there are some districts that have discovered a very different number of poverty students in their count this year than existed last year. Are those additional students counted in that FY 24 column anywhere?
Nope, this is based on what was released last year. If they submitted, more ADM related, but if people find ADM that was, say, the wrong amount was submitted in 24 and they did revise that in 25, but it doesn't impact what's happened in the past.
So those kids, wherever they are, they don't exist anywhere in this model.
Because they were not received during the census collection, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing again and reshare the last document, and I have just selected one district. So as I think about what I will share with the business managers or the field as a whole, it often is, how does it apply to me? What's available that's specific to us? And so this is the beginning. It's not formatted terribly pretty yet. Please excuse that. But I was just trying to think through what would need to be shared. And this would work like a lot of the workbooks at the Agency of Education. So a district goes, they get the workbook, they go in, they select their district. And what that does for them is all of this text at the top is same for everyone. It gives a sample. It talks about where the 24 and 25 information came from, what weights were used each year. And then down here is where the more specific information to that district comes in. This district is actually an interesting one because they see a percent decrease in their share, they are someone who rounds to zero. So this goes on to say district will not receive tax rate discount. And this comment right here toggles based on the district that's chosen. And that is because their loss of statewide share rounds to zero. So they show zeros here.
This is my district. If anyone was for task me.
And And so if a district did have a percent share decrease of greater than 1, they would see for the 5 years what their discount would be rounded to the nearest cent. Now, again, going into the background, there would be parts of cents in the calculation, but from just this page, if your district was 10.2 cents in the second year, they would see 10 cents from this graphic. And that is what I had to share, but welcome to any questions.
So when I read this in that top box, FY 24 here, Wyndham, Southeast, et cetera. So 2.62 in the first column, 2.62 in the second column, and then it says percent change. So I just find that a little bit confusing because it looks like the percent change should be 0.
Yes, and it has to do with some is rounded and some is not, and it's sort of, we have to figure out the right place to round or not. Because, right, it might be frustrating to see this and then go down one more and see the text that you won't get a discount. And so early stages, but I am, as soon as appropriate, going to try to get something out to the field as they are all
Excited to learn.
I really appreciate how incredibly clear this is. In the words, sort of explaining the process to people and sort of the, the key information in the tables. Other questions from folks?
And just, Nicole, just in the spirit of open disclosure, I'm just trying to prevent you from getting calls. Like, that was not my call. I know you're gonna get, but I think the amount of ones that are gonna look that way will probably be limited, so.
I expect that it is, and I think even if the number was 3%, like a reduction of 3%, I may still get a call as this sort of works its way through. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think with that, it makes sense to stop for the day. We're going to look at the language again tomorrow, along with the budget warning language. Just want to sort of say again, whoever's beeping, can you stop? Peter, can you stop beeping for a minute? Thanks. So the budget warning language, there's also an increased cost to a district if they're going to rewarn their budget, right? You have to like print new pieces of paper, for instance. And so, but appropriations for that would actually come out of the general fund, not from the education fund. And so it puts money aside for that. It would go through the Secretary of State's office. That they've done that before. So I'm going to ask them to come in and speak to the language and would sort of, ask some of our education partners to come in and testify on that. And that's sort of the next steps that I see for us going forward. And we will come back together again tomorrow. But if you have thoughts in the intervening time, please do let me know about them. Thanks. You can go. Oh, do you have a thought?
Comment for Carolyn's question about students from, an hour ago. So,
I haven't forgotten. Yeah.
yeah, the information we presented wraps in more than is apparent, which is to say, the student weights take into effect. My son who's got problems with this, or me, or something, I never learned this, that, or the other kind of stuff. And so by the time we get to the blue dots, a lot of that has already been essentially baked in. I've used that term too much, but it's already been figured into where we end up with the dots. So your concern has been answered. It's just not apparent in, the few choices that we got. Does that help? At least I think that's right.
Thank you, Jim. Yes, I appreciate your effort.
Okay. once in a while.
I need to learn how that has happened.
Yeah.
And what it involves, because if I got up on town meeting day and said just what you said, they'd tell me I was trying to perform magic. They have to see, they have to see what happens.
I want to continue to recommend the fantastic pupil weighting report and pupil weighting task force report as key background information leading up to this.
I just want to check in
Yeah.
about sort of next steps,
Mhm.
signal a little bit about like
Yeah.
this bill.
Mhm.
You've also talked about bigger term conversations around future years and then the mitigating the increase. I assume that's like, so there's this bill, there's a yield conversation when other revenues might, or other mitigating strategies would come into place, and then any thoughts about the longer term conversation and what vehicle and how and when?
No, I think we all need to figure that out together. And I think the education committee is gonna need to take a lot of the lead on that. And they're beginning that. So one great example, I think, is school construction and the school construction task force. That's a big sort of out year mitigating issue. The out year tax issues, I think, are something that we all need to think through, and that would be a committee bill.
That would somehow get passed before crossover.
Sure. We're gonna get it all done, team. It's gonna be an amazing year. Okay, we are gonna stop for the day and see everyone tomorrow. Thanks.